Educational Resources Intelligent Neural Network Online.
Hey Aaron,
Good morning, sir.
what's on the list for today?
Today we're teaching our subscribers about Blender's interface and how to get started on their first project.
Oh boy, I'm going to need another cup of coffee. You get them started, get them familiar with the interface, give them a printout of the new terminology and stuff.
Sir,
okay?
you've already had 2 cups this morning.
All right.
Too much caffeine can lead to
you,
negative
Aaron.
side effects such as jitteriness,
Yep.
anxiety,
Okay.
insomnia, and increased heart rate.
All right.
Streaming screen feed now. When you open Blender for the first time, your screen will be divided into 4 sections. These sections are called areas. If Blender was a house, then these areas would be the different rooms. Rooms in a house have particular functions. The kitchen, for example, is where you prepare your meals. There, you'll find tools to help you fulfill that function. In Blender, our rooms or our areas also have specific functions. We call these functions editor types. Every area can be assigned a new editor type. You'll find these in the drop-down at the top left of every area. Take our biggest area, for instance. It's currently assigned as the 3D viewport. The 3D viewport is like an infinite movie set. It's where we interact with our props, our environments, our lights, and the cameras. On the top right here, we have what's called the outliner. Data from our 3D scene is represented here in a clean table format. We can see which objects we have in our scene. Right now, we have a camera, a cube, and a light. We also have this box icon called collection. A collection is like a folder where we can store objects to keep them organized. To rename an object or a collection, just double-click and start typing. Below the outliner, we have yet another area. The editor type in this area is called the Properties Editor. As you can imagine, this is where we control many of the properties within a scene. We'll get more in-depth on these settings as needed throughout the course. Finally, at the bottom we have an editor type called the Timeline. This is a representation of time in the scene. By default, we're starting the counter at frame 1 and going to frame 250. If you press spacebar, the timeline should play. Your blue frame indicator will start a count up. When we add animation to a scene, this is where we'll control where we are in time. These are just the first 4 editor types. In Blender, there are 23 in total. The good news is, you won't need to know everything. We'll tackle editor types as needed throughout the course. As you work with your areas and editor types in Blender, you'll find yourself needing different layouts for achieving different tasks. We refer to these layouts as workspaces. This 4-area layout is our default workspace. Blender has provided us with an array of workspace templates at the top of our window. You can click through each one. There are no hard and fast rules when it comes to laying out a workspace. These templates are just soft suggestions. For the most part, Riley will be staying in the default workspace and will just be adding and removing areas as needed. To add an area, simply right-click on the border. You can then choose to split an area either horizontally or vertically. To join 2 areas that have been split, right-click on the border and choose Join Areas. Left-click and drag to resize an area. There are other ways to join and split areas. You can also click on a corner and just drag out. Riley prefers the right-click method, but it's up to you. Remember, after creating an area, you can choose the editor type assigned to that area at the top left of every area. To temporarily make an area full screen, just hover your mouse in that area and press Ctrl spacebar. You'll see Riley do this from time to time when he really wants your focus in one spot. To go back, just press Ctrl space again. So that's it for areas, editor types, and workspaces. These are the building blocks to Blender's user interface. If you're working with 2 or more monitors, you might want to open Blender in a few different windows. To do that is pretty easy. Just go up to Window and select either New Window or New Main Window. A main window will have all of the file menus up top and may be preferable to some. Since Riley is recording his tutorial in one screen, he'll be keeping Blender in one window, but feel free to expand as needed. As requested, I've generated a PDF summarizing all of this new interface terminology. You can download it from the description below. Riley is approaching now.
All right, thanks Aaron. I'll take it from here. You should be good.
Good luck, sir.
Cool. All right, so hopefully Aaron explained to you kind of the interface. Really just wanted to cover the basics, like the different areas, editor types, and we'll get into more as we go. But I just wanted to open up Blender for the first time. This is what you'll see. This is what we call a splash screen. So the splash screen is different when you open it for the first time, and it's going to ask you a few questions for your quick setup. Really, you could just leave it at the defaults, but just in case, let me explain a few of these. So for the language, let's keep it to English. For shortcuts, just keep it to Blender Standard. We're going to keep it to left-click select, and our spacebar action, by default, we want it to play the timeline. And then for the theme, let's just keep it at Blender Dark. All right, so hit Next. And this is the splash screen you'll see typically when you open up Blender. We can actually just click out of that. And here we are. So within Blender, this is our default scene. We have 3 objects. Hopefully Aaron showed you our outliner up here so you could see what we have in our scene. We have a camera, a cube, and a light. Let's first talk about how to select objects. So really, it's just left clicking. You can either left click in the outliner or left click here in the 3D viewport. You can also click and drag. If clicking and dragging is not working, then go up here to your toolbar. It's on the left hand side. If you don't see a toolbar there, you can click this little arrow and it will expand, or you just press T for toolbar. Okay? And up at the top, we have our box select tool. So if that's selected, which it should be by default, then you can click and drag and select things with a box. If you want to deselect, just click in an empty space. If you want to select everything, the shortcut is A for all. If you want to deselect everything, the shortcut is Alt-A to deselect everything. If you want to delete something, go ahead and select it, like our cube here, and you can press Delete on the keyboard. Let's hit Control-Z to undo. There are multiple ways to do things in Blender. Another way you can delete is press X. The reason you might want to get familiar with X is simply because you can use your left hand on the keyboard, just on the left. Your hand is going to kind of be resting there, and that way you don't have to look down, find delete, take your hand off the mouse. It's just faster. So either delete or X, either way is fine. Now, something annoying that happens, in my opinion, is when you press X, this little pop-up comes up and it says, OK, delete, kind of has you confirm. I think that's annoying because personally, if I delete it, I've made up my mind and I want it gone. And if I accidentally deleted it, I could just hit Control-Z. So to get rid of that little annoying pop-up, this is just my personal preference. Go to Edit and then go to Preferences, all right? And then head down to Navigation. Sorry, not Navigation. It's going to be Key Map. My bad. And then under Key Map, let's just scroll. Well, let's go to the search bar. That'll be faster. And let's type in delete. Okay. Now, there are a lot of different editor types in Blender, as Aaron kind of went over. Let's scroll down until we're looking at delete options for object mode in our 3D viewport. And then the X key, as you can see right here, we want to look into that. So hit the little drop down arrow, and right here where it says confirm, we don't want the prompt for confirmation, so we can just turn that off. And it should auto save your preferences, but just for my own sanity, sometimes I come over here and just hit save preferences. Sweet. So now if we hit X, it will just delete automatically. So let's hit A to select everything and then X to delete everything. Now we have an empty scene. That's not very useful. Let's look at how we add new objects, okay? And I haven't gotten into navigating yet. You might see me navigate a little bit. I'm going to show you in just like 30 seconds, all right? So to add something to the scene, you can hit Add up on the top menu here, and that brings up our Add menu. And there's all sorts of stuff you can add. We're going to go over sort of each of these in more depth as we go. Another shortcut you're going to want to learn is Shift-A, and that's Shift-A for Add, and that just brings up the same menu. The reason I want you to get that shortcut down is just because you're going to be adding stuff a lot, and it's a time saver to not come up here to the top, but it's up there if you forget. So Shift-A for Add, and let's go to Mesh, which are kind of just these primitive shapes, and let's add a cube. So we have our cube back into the scene. Okay, so let's get into navigation real quick. There are 3 main functions for navigating in Blender. We have orbiting, we have panning, and we have zooming. So I'm going to go through those three, and then I'm going to show you just a few preferences that I have on how I navigate through Blender. All right. So the first one, orbiting, you could do that by holding down the middle mouse button and moving your mouse around. If you're on like a Mac and you're using Apple's Magic Mouse, you don't have a middle button. In your case, you can just put your finger towards the middle of the mouse and just move it around, and it will perform something similar, although personally, I do suggest you get a mouse with a middle mouse button. All right, so hold down your middle mouse button and move your mouse around, and that will orbit. To pan, just hold down Shift on your keyboard and then hold down the middle mouse button and then move your mouse. So orbit, just middle mouse, pan, Shift, middle mouse. And then for zooming, you can hold down Control, middle mouse, and that will give you sort of a smooth zoom. Alternatively, you could just use your scroll wheel, which a lot of people do. One thing to mention, if you have, I don't even know what to call it, if you have this little button that releases your scroll wheel lock, then you might notice you scroll and you just like zoom way out and you've lost your scene and you don't know where you are, okay? So just be mindful of that if you have that little scroll wheel lock. I don't even know what it's called. But this is a great opportunity to show you what happens if you're lost. You don't know where you are. You're trying to zoom around and I found it on accident. But let's say you couldn't find your cube, okay? To find it, we need to frame our selection, okay? So let's say you don't have the cube selected. How do you select your cube? You can't see it, so we can't select it in the 3D viewport. One thing we could do is we press A to select all. If you forgot that, you also have your outliner up here at the top right where you could just click on your cube and now it's selected. Now to jump to our cube to find out where it is, there are two ways. First way is I'm going to show you a new menu. And to get to that menu, you hold down the tilde key. If you haven't used the tilde key, it's the one typically below the escape key. It's that little squiggly line. So hold down the tilde key and you'll get what we call a pie menu. Now the reason pie menus are so great is because they're gestural, meaning they're built just to make quick gestures. So you pull it up with the tilde key, you gesture towards view selected, and then you let go of the tilde key, and that will view our cube because our cube was selected. So that's the first way, all right? Second way is the shortcut, which I encourage you to remember, and that's the period key on your number pad. If you don't have a number pad, just go ahead and press the tilde key, all right? So if we click the period key on our number pad, that will zoom in and we'll find out where our cube is. Cool, so we have a cube. Let's add back in a camera. Do you remember the add menu? See if you can remember the shortcut. It is Shift A for add, and then we'll go down to camera and just add our camera in there. Now you might notice you can't really see our camera, and that's because the camera is inside of the cube because it appeared the same place that the cube appeared. So how do we see our camera? How do we select it? And then how can we move it? So to see our camera, we're going to turn on something called Xray mode. Okay, so Xray mode is simply, let's see here, it should be Alt-Z, and that turns on Xray mode. If you don't remember that shortcut, then it's just up top here. You can see this little, looks like a little cube with a dotted line. That is toggle X-ray. So you can just click on that button as well. But now we kind of get this X-ray vision and we can see inside of our cube. Alternatively, instead of X-ray, let's hit Alt-Z again. You can hit Shift-Z and that will turn on wireframe mode. So that really lets us see through our cube completely and just shows the lines of the cube. So either way, turn on X-ray or wireframe, and then we can select our camera. Now let's go back out, hit Shift-Z again, and now we're in normal shaded view. So how do we move things like our camera and our scene? We want to frame the camera so it's looking at the cube. There are three main things you could do to transform or alter an object, in this case a camera in Blender. You can grab it, you can rotate it, and you can scale it. So, respectively, the shortcuts for those are G for grab, R for rotate, and S for scale. This is one I definitely recommend you just get used to Blender's way of doing this. Even if you come from Maya, if you come from Maya, you're probably familiar with like the gizmo workflow. So you come over here in Blender and you click this little gizmo on your tool menu, and you get this gizmo that you'd be used to seeing in Maya. In Maya and a lot of other programs, the shortcuts are W, E, and R, and that will kind of switch between these gizmos. So you could do it that way, but like I said, I encourage you to get used to Blender's way of doing it, just because in the long run, it's definitely going to be faster for you to work. So to grab something, again, it's just the G key, and now if we move our mouse, we are grabbing that camera. If you want to slow down, maybe it's moving too fast, with any of these functions, you can hold down Shift, and that's going to put you into like this macro fine-tuning mode, okay? If you want to confirm your movement, you would left-click. Let's say you accidentally press G, or you don't really want to move it, you change your mind, you can right-click, and it'll jump back to wherever it was before you grabbed it. So let's go ahead and grab it, and let's just try to move it over here. But this isn't very precise. What if we only wanted to move it on the y-axis, which is that green line? Well, that's pretty easy. We press G to grab, and then before we click anything, we press Y, and now it's just locked on the y-axis. Or we can lock it on X and Z, all right? If we want to lock it on everything except for one axis, let's say we want to move it on everything except for up and down, except for Z. We can press G for grab, and then we can press Shift Z to say move it on everything except for Z. So let's move it over here. And then let's say we want to move it a bit more on these axes, axi, I don't know the plural for axis. Now we want to look within our camera, as if we're looking into our camera to see what the camera sees. You might have seen this before. Just go to the tilde menu again, and now it's the bottom left diagonal view camera, okay? The shortcut for that is just 0 on your number pad if you have a number pad. All right, so now we're inside of our camera, and there's this French word called the passe-partout, something like that. I call it a film gate. It's this dark gray area outside. That's everything the camera cannot see. The camera is only going to render what's inside in this light gray area. Okay, so that's just so you don't get confused and you don't know what your camera is actually seeing. So to move our camera, I'm going to show you two ways. I'm going to show you video game mode, which I prefer, and then I'm going to show what I like to call Maya mode. Okay, so for video game mode, just hit Shift tilde, and that will bring us into video game mode. So if we move our mouse, we're kind of looking around. And then if we use WASD, we can move the camera. We can also use E and Q to go up and down. If you hold down Shift while you're doing any of that, it will double the speed, so you're moving a little faster. If that's still not fast enough, you can scroll up on your scroll wheel, and that will increase, or if you scroll down, that will decrease your speed. Give you kind of fine-tuning. It depends on how big your scene is, how big the thing is that you're trying to look at, right? So let's just use that, and we'll kind of frame up our camera. If you play video games, then this is probably really comfortable for you, and that's why I'd prefer to use this method. So left click, and it will confirm our movement. Okay, so again, to do that, we just went into the camera with the tilde menu, okay, and then we hit Shift tilde, and that put us into video game mode. By the way, you don't have to be in your camera to use video game mode. You could hit Shift tilde just while you're viewing your scene, and you can use that to navigate around as well. All right, so I promise I show you two ways to move the camera. Let's hit 0 on our number pad, jump back in the camera, and this is what I like to call Maya mode. So to get Maya's camera navigation mode, we need to hit the letter N as in no, on our keyboard, and that will bring up our right-hand menu. Or you could just click this little arrow on the right-hand side. This brings up a new tool menu. So we have T and N for our two tool menus in the 3D viewport. On the N menu, just go down to View, and now there's this little option called lock camera to view. So if we check that, now wherever we rotate, orbit around, pan, zoom in our scene, our camera is going to follow. And then to confirm that, we would just jump outside of our camera view, and now our camera is right there. So let's go back in the end menu. I'm going to turn that off. The only reason is I like to zoom in while I'm rendering something just so I can see what's happening. So those are the basics of navigation in Blender. One preference that I just have, go to Edit Preferences, and let's go to Navigation. Personally, I like Auto Depth. You can see what it says here. It says use the depth under the mouse to improve view, pan, rotate, and zoom functionality. Test around with auto depth on and off. You might notice the difference. I'll try to explain what it does. And then the other thing I like to have on is I like to zoom to mouse position. So basically what that does is zoom in towards the mouse pointer's position in the 3D viewport rather than the 2D window center. So by default, when you zoom in on Blender, you'll kind of just zoom into the middle no matter what. What I like to have is I like to zoom in towards the 3D cursor. So if I'm zoomed out and I want to see the corner of that cube, I just put my mouse there and I kind of zoom into the corner of the cube. The auto mouse depth, the reason I like that is it's much easier once you're really, really close up to something. It will kind of orbit under where my mouse is pointed instead of just the center of that object. So if I had it off, it might try to orbit like this. But with that on, I can sort of point at this corner on the cube and I can orbit just around that. So a few little navigation things that I like personally. In the next video, we're going to continue this on. I've had Aaron create a mock project for us, which is kind of just a fake client project that will give us an excuse to learn some of the tools that we're going to be getting into. This will be a full Blender beginner course, kind of a whole tutorial series, multiple hours long, and I want to put it all out there for free on YouTube. The only way I can do that is if I get some sort of financial backing, and the way I've chosen to do that is through my Patreon. So to join my Patreon, just go to patreon.com/Riley Brown, and there you can subscribe. One of the cool things I've done with my Patreon is if you subscribe, you'll automatically get access to my website, my asset website, which is offworlddepot.com. So go ahead and subscribe to Patreon for at least the $7 a month. And if you do that, you'll help this course continue to be free. You'll also get free assets on offworlddepot.com. There aren't many assets right now. It's something I'm going to be building up over time as I go and as I find out what you guys are really interested in. So hopefully that's a good look at just Blender's interface and how to easily navigate in Blender. Join us for the next part where we're going to start looking at the modeling tools and beginning this client project that we have. So thanks for checking this out. Please go consider subscribing, and I'll see you on the next video. Aaron, anything that I missed that we should talk about?
Sir, perhaps you should address the reasons for why you created me. Your videos were taking too long to produce. Perhaps I should mention this new format and how my assistance will enable you to finish more videos. I would also like to stress just how important it is for viewers to subscribe so you can keep making free tutorials.
All right, thanks. That should just about do it. See you on the next video. Let's shut it down, Aaron.
I'm right here. You really don't need to yell. Suggesting helpful videos for our viewers. Preparing a lullaby and snack for your nap time. Do you really think they'll watch this?